Thank you again, everybody, for joining me today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this OER stuff is, how you can get started with it, and how you might support instructors as they're getting into OER as well as a librarian, or if you're not a librarian, as an instructional designer or other support staff. Now, we're going to go over a lot of the basics. So if you already know the basics, sorry about that. But we're also going to go into a little bit more of how to build up a program to support OER in your institutional context. So to start with the very, very basics again, what are open educational resources anyway? Well, UNESCO defines them as learning, teaching, and research materials in any format that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no-cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others. But that's a bit of a mouthful, so let's take that back a step and think more about what exactly this means. Well, in other words, open educational resources are educational resources that are open. Now, that might be too many steps back, so let's take it up a little bit. Educational resources can be any sort of teaching materials, such as syllabi, lesson plans, and textbooks that are openly licensed, meaning that you're able to share them and make use of them in different ways. Licensing allows you to retain, redistribute, reuse, revise, and remix these materials. Or in other words, you can download to keep them forever. They're not DRM licensed and locked down on your computer. You can share the copies with other people or reuse them in your class. You can make edits to materials for your own use and remix and combine them with other things as well. This isn't just a, hey, you can have this copy, but don't do anything with it. Openly licensing actually gives you a lot more permissions to make materials your own. A lot of the time when we're talking about copyright, things can get a little confusing, but Creative Commons licenses do fall within normal copyright conventions. In other words, you're still someone who has ownership over your work when you place a license on it. You're just keeping some rights reserved while giving up others to other people. When I talk to instructors about open educational resources, I like to talk about it this way. Do you like getting 5 emails at once, all asking for a copy of your paper? And hey, can I use this image in my own paper? And hey, can you give me permission to do this because my publisher won't let me otherwise? Well, if you hate those emails as much as I do, then licensing can help you get around it. Creative Commons licenses are just a way of giving express permission for people to reuse your works in different ways. This is on part of a spectrum between all rights reserved copyright, where people have to ask for permission every single time or work out a licensing deal with you, like Sony does for the Spider-Man license, for example, or on the other end, public domain, where no rights are reserved and people can reuse works in different ways. That's how we get things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, because now that that work is in the public domain, people can reuse it in whatever way they like. Creative Commons falls in the middle where you're still the rights holder. You can still do what you want with your work, but you can give up some of those rights so people can share and reuse it in different ways. And open educational resources can fall between both of these areas. They can be some rights or no rights reserved. So really it depends on where you want to fall in that spectrum, how you might use or share them. Creative Commons licenses are not just one specific thing too. They have different pieces to them that make up how they work. So you can choose if you want to have a Creative Commons license that is just, hey, share my work and do whatever you want with it, as long as you provide credit to me. That's the attribution license. You can add additional pieces to it as well, like share alike, which says, hey, you can use this however you like, but keep it open under the same license that I've used, or the non-commercial piece, which also says you cannot sell or profit off of the work as well. In other words, open educational resources are any sort of teaching materials that are free and open. It gives you those licensing rights, it lets you share them, but it's also free to access. Now, a lot of the time we really focus on that freeness when we talk about OER. We say, hey, this is free textbooks, this is free teaching materials, and that's great, but the openness is part of the important piece of it. When you're using just free resources like websites, blogs, YouTube videos, lecture notes, or library licensed ebooks, which are free for you, but not necessarily free for everyone, those sorts of things are great, but the open piece also allows you to adapt and remix materials in more ways. And yes, open textbooks and OER modules are different in some ways, but also websites, blogs, and YouTube videos can be OER so long as they're openly licensed. Now, I've gone over a lot about what is an open educational resource and how do these licenses work, but I do also want to note that open education is not all about open educational resources. OER is one piece of the puzzle, but open education also includes instructional design, open pedagogy, open education research, open source software, open access publishing. There's a lot of different pieces that fit into the puzzle that is open ed. And so there's a lot of ways you can engage with this work as well, whether you're a librarian, an instructional designer, or a faculty member yourself. In fact, the Cape Town Declaration, one of the very earliest pieces of the open education movement, said outright, hey, the emerging open education movement combines established tradition of sharing good ideas with fellow educators and the collaborative, interactive culture of the internet. This wasn't just people coming together and saying, we're going to come up with something brand new. It was building on those sort of foundational pieces of education that were already there. So before we dig any deeper, I want to ask you, where are you on this spectrum? How much did you already know about open education coming in? Were you completely new to this topic? Or is this something that you already have a good grasp on, but you're hoping for more of the deeper pieces later on? I will open up the chat so I can see this real quick. Looking for beyond the basics, familiar and looking for more details, totally new. Lovely. It's good to see there's a mix, newer to the topic, but developing knowledge, new but getting familiar. I think new but getting familiar is one of those places you're in for a couple of years. Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully this will be helpful as you guys are digging more into this topic. So now that we've got the very basics of what are open educational resources, what are open licenses, and what is open ed, let's talk a little bit more about why you should support OER in your local community. Now, a lot of us, especially if you're trying to build up more support for OER within your own position or within your institution, will get asked this question at some point. Someone will say, why should we care about this thing specifically? Well, you should support open education because it lowers barriers for students, cost, access, and format barriers. It can help K-12 schools access free and up-to-date content. This is not just for higher ed. It can connect educators across states and regions to help them build more support networks, especially if they're in a field that is fairly small. It can enhance the inclusivity and relevance of teaching materials. So you're not just talking about, well, this is the one book we have on this topic and it's not great, but it works. Having open educational resources means you can adapt materials to provide more inclusive examples and to be more relevant to the students in your context. You can provide more educational resources for lifelong learners. This isn't just for students at colleges. Again, this is also for people in the public who just want to have access to a textbook. I want to look up how this works now. What is this about? And you can offer more options for our educators and learners alike, so they don't have to pick the one book that exists. They can tweak things, they can edit, they can adapt as they need as well. But when you keep in mind all of those different pieces I just said, yes, it's great to support OER, but identifying new teaching materials, implementing them in a course, and especially taking full advantage of the affordances of openness and adapting them, that takes time, it takes support, and it takes training to do well. And that's an important thing to bring up when someone says, why should we support this? Because actually having an open education initiative supporting OER on your campus is like saying, hey, our institution cares about this work. We are not asking you to do this alone. Going the extra mile and having that support system in place shows that this isn't something you're just asking people to do. It's something that's actually supported by your institution and that's going to be good for someone in their own career and positions. So what can you do? Let's say you have the support now to get things moving locally. You want to support open education in different ways. What are ways that a lot of OER initiatives offer support for instructors? Well, you can support those in finding OER. Hey, it's really hard to find this stuff sometimes. You got to know where to look. And luckily, as librarians, we have a lot that we can help with that. You can provide professional development support, local advocacy, open textbook publishing services, run an OER committee, or offer small grants, awards, or stipends. These are just a few examples, and I'm going to go over a couple of them as we go through this on how you might get started and what you might offer in this realm. But first, you have to learn how. So, if you were to go out and say, I want to find OER for a topic, I want to help someone find resources for their class, how would you do it? Well, locating OER is fairly simple once you get the basics, but it's one of those things where there's a steep learning curve at the beginning. Where do I even look? Where do I go? The process that I typically recommend is to first ask for a syllabus from the instructor you're working with, because actually having the topics they teach in their class is the most useful way to dig into the keywords that you need to search for. Second, identify those keywords. What are the things they're teaching week by week and month by month? And then what is the overarching topic of the class? Third, search broadly. Look at the larger OER repositories, which I'll go over in a minute, and even Google when you need to. Fourth, align content to that course and to that syllabus that you already have, and then reflect and repeat this process. I have an OER content sharing template that is linked in these slides, which I'll share out after this as well, so you can get an idea of how you might do this in your own context. Let's go through an example together. Uh, Here are a couple of search tools. We've got Oasis, the Open Textbook Library, and OER Commons. Really broad searches. So Open Textbook Library is good if you're just looking for textbooks. OER Commons is good if you're looking for all the sorts of little weird things that aren't textbooks, especially for things like lesson plans. Although it's good to know OER Commons is also popular with K-12, so you'll want to limit for college level resources if you're using it. And Oasis has a mix of different materials from different places that it's pulling from. So I recommend starting with that first if you just want a broad overview. You can also check out more options. I have my own library guide here that you can use to look up other materials and places to search. After you do some searches in these different tools, then you can dig deeper for topics covered in a specific week or module. And if you can't find anything, I do recommend trying advanced search in Google or other search tools of your preference. I personally use DuckDuckGo, but some educators have created really good resources that they do not know are open educational resources. They have Creative Commons licensed them, they have shared them widely as well as they can, but you can't find them in an OER repository because it hasn't been linked there, it hasn't been shared there. So in those cases, using advanced search and looking for things that are specifically usage rights, free to use or share, which means it's been openly licensed, will help you find additional things that might not be otherwise available. Here's where I found Learn Electrical Engineering, which is a PhD student's amazing electrical engineering website with a lot of modules on this topic that I would not have known about otherwise. And he's just doing this out of the love for teaching and learning about this topic. So again, these are the sorts of things that might fall through the cracks otherwise that we can learn about, lift up, and share elsewhere once we find them. And if you do find a resource like this, please feel free to share it in OER Commons so more people can link to it and say they appreciate it as well. But okay, let's say you're finding materials, you're sharing them out. Well, how do you go about actually managing the process of helping people find OER? A lot of the time, it's helpful to have a specific consultations process. Like a research consultation, an OER consultation is just a meeting where you can support someone in finding information that they need. But consultations do not have to be a as people come in, you support them sort of thing. Because if you start off that way, eventually it will get busy. It helps to have some sort of process in place where you can leverage the support of other people in your context. So, what I recommend is having a contact form, first of all, so people can share information with you up front. And you can do some searching before your meeting to figure out if this is going to be a difficult conversation or one that you can have a little bit more easily. Working with your subject librarians, if there are multiple ones aside from you that can help with this process, especially if they already have built-in connections with people across your departments. And figure out what would work best in your context generally. Do you have other people you can lean on for support? Are there specific guardrails you should put in place, like, hey, I will get back to you within 3 business days? That way people know not to expect an immediate response. Whenever you're offering support, especially if it's something that's extra on top of your usual work, it's best to put in some sort of guidelines early. That way you're not putting too much forward that you're going to have to continue to offer in the future. Here's an example of an OER consultations form from CSU Dominguez Hills, which basically has just a short overview of, hey, are you interested in adopting free or low cost resources in your classes? You can make an appointment with us for a consultation, fill out our form, and we can help you do this. Just having a short little blurb about this is this is what you can get out of it, can really help people feel less stressed out about asking for help. And it also means they're not having to reach out to you directly. In addition to helping people find resources, you can also build in training opportunities. But as you build in things like professional development and workshops, you have a few things you need to consider. First, your workload. As with all things, think about what you actually have the time to offer. Second, your audience's interests. Do you have a lot of instructors that are heavily into OER already and want to learn more about open pedagogy or other types of open educational practices? Or do you have a lot of people on your campus that are brand new to this topic and need to get the basics? Third, what's viable long term for you? What can you actually offer over time that's not going to be too much? And finally, what terms will still stand out to OER newcomers? It's not OER, I'll tell you that. So some examples I have from workshops I give this year. So just this week, I had free textbooks and more, an introduction to OER, just to get people into the door to say, hey, this isn't just free textbooks, but also free textbooks is a much easier pitch than OER, some weird acronym. Increasing student engagement with open pedagogy is my open pedagogy workshop, which again focuses on the student piece. What do instructors actually want out of this? They are not going to necessarily know the term open pedagogy, but they will know student engagement. And my copyright workshop, can I use that copyright in the classroom? Which is also good because it's the question that everyone's always asking. Can I use this book chapter? Can I copy this paper? How does this work in my class? Think about the questions people are actually asking in your context and tailor your trainings to those needs. Now, it's not just workshops that you can offer. You can also support professional development through learning communities, networking events, one-off trainings, and guest speakers. There's a lot of different ways that you can build interest besides just workshops. But workshops are an easy place to get started because you can offer them once and see how it goes and make tweaks over time. I have sort of some pros and cons here of two different approaches, the workshops and one-offs and the learning communities. Now, on the one hand, workshops are great because they can be run annually. You can adapt them to changing interests and feedback, but it doesn't really build community and it's hard to gauge how much people are learning and developing across your institution. After all, if one person attends a 101 workshop, they might not attend anymore afterwards. In contrast, a learning community is an ongoing commitment. It's a place where you're going to see the same people coming back, learning more, and building connections across your institution, but it requires a lot of time investment, and the staff running the work also need to have expertise and time to support the instructors who are engaging in the learning community. So it can be difficult to get off the ground. Having a little bit of both can be great, but again, if you're just getting started, doing a couple of workshops is a great place to start. So we've gone over what are open educational resources, how are they licensed, how can you support them, and the first two ways you can support them are by running workshops and helping people find materials. But support doesn't have to be a one-on-one helping people as you need them. It can also be advocacy on a broader scale. Now, advocating for open education in your campus has a lot of options for what you can do. You can go out and present to departments and say, hey, did you know there are these OER in your discipline? Did you know that this is something you could consider? Please check these out and come talk to me if you have questions. You can present to student government and say, hey, did you know that these courses at our university are using free textbooks? Do you want more people to use free textbooks? Again, you change your terminology a little bit depending on who you're talking to, uh, and get them to help you lobby on campus as well. Student government is often going to have a lot more power on campus than you do because they're the main audience for the university itself. You can also present to faculty government or faculty senate. This is especially useful if you want to support instructors as they are developing open educational resources for their tenure and promotion packets. You can bring in guest speakers because honestly, sometimes it's easier to get people to buy in when it's not you, someone locally talking about a topic, but you have someone else who can be an outside speaker and explain this is something useful, this is something bigger than us. You can go to door. Seriously, you can go door to door and just talk to people about open ed. Uh, I know a couple of people have said in the chat, I'm that one weird OER person on my campus, and maybe you feel the same. But it can be a good way to build connections with people who are interested in learning more. And you can connect with peers like instructional designers, IT staff, and others who are interested in similar topics. Finally, a good way to advocate is just by helping people come to you by offering awards, support, or grants when you can. I see we have a question in the chat. How do you actually apply a CC license to your work? Is there a formalized process? Ooh, we will get to that in a little bit, but thank you for the question. And what has been your experience with partnering with faculty support services such as Teaching Excellence Center to promote and do workshops? Yes, I will say for that last question, I can talk about it because it's really relevant to where we are right here. We've run workshops with our Center for Learning and Teaching here at Iowa State. And the most useful thing has been talking about what are their priorities, what are our priorities, and how can we connect to one another. So one thing they're trying to get off the ground is more people doing Quality Matters certification for their courses to see that they have high quality online courses, right? And one nice thing about open educational resources is they're very easy for a Quality Matters review committee to find, review, and say that this is high quality educational materials you're using in your class. So when we're saying we want you to do this and we want you to do that, and they have a good sense of connection there, I can use accessible, high quality materials that are aligned with my class and match my learning objectives. And that's going to help me get this mark of approval from the Center for Learning and Teaching. And it's going to help bring down costs for students. It's win-win across the board. So finding those connections is a really good way to sort of start building more together. I'll answer some more questions about licensing in a little bit, but thank you for these questions. As I mentioned earlier, one way to support advocacy is through open ed and tenure and promotion. So a lot of ways that people have concerns about OER is doing all of this work, is this labor not going to actually do anything for me in my professional career? You can help with that by being a person that steps up and says open educational resources, especially the creation of new materials, should be acknowledged as scholarship. And if it's not just publication, but it's research into OER use, OER service work through committees, or other work you're doing, it should count as service, teaching, whatever the case may be, how it fits into your own promotion and tenure documentation. You can find some tips on our website, oept.pubpub.org, of how other institutions have worked this into their own tenure and promotion packets, as well as some tips for instructors and advocates in making the case on their own campus. And you can also support the publication of new open educational resources. Now, many OER support staff help authors who want to publish and share their own OER. This might be done through support from grants, a university press or library publisher, an institutional repository, or more casual support like sharing recommended tools and guides and saying, let us know if you have questions. Now, one person asked earlier, and I'm going to answer that question here. How do you know that someone has reused your work and that they've modified it? How did people know what's yours and what's new? When you're sharing someone else's work and you're saying, hey, this is an openly licensed thing that I have adapted, then you have to legally give attribution to the original author. After you've remixed something, though, you should make it clear what you've remixed and how. So let's say you added a new chapter, you would say, this chapter is written by me to add more context in this area that I teach in my class. If it's a smaller edit, like I'm just tweaking some wording, removing some content, you might not list that out explicitly. It depends on the individual. But no matter what you're doing for a remix project, you need to provide the original author, link to their work, and that way people can still compare and contrast what your version looks like and what theirs does. The nice thing is, because this is always a concern that instructors have, what happens to my work when someone adapts it? Yours is still there. It's in the exact same place it's always been. The adaptation is just a separate alternate version, which is why it helps when other instructors reusing a work might say, hey, this is fundamentals of economics for our institution, where you can make it clear this has been adapted for this use case. Okay, so we've talked about different kinds of support services you can offer, what are open educational resources, and I'm going to talk about where to get started if you want to build up this sort of support in your institution. The three things I typically recommend starting with are running an environmental scan, identifying and connecting with peers, and building partnerships for success, which is a businessy way of saying make friends. But first, you want to assess your institution, figure out where things are right now and how you can build support where it's easy. An environmental scan can help you by doing a self-reflection, saying, okay, based on what I know about my school, what's going to work for us? We are a small private institution, so maybe the cost savings piece isn't as exciting, but people will be interested in open pedagogy. Or we're a mid-sized community college, so we have some support for doing more of this OER work. Maybe I could get some grants off the ground if I asked for help. You could run surveys of students and faculty to learn how they feel about the cost of educational materials and how they identify good materials for their classes. Do an internal review. Maybe it's a little easier by saying, okay, I'm going to go around and see what's happening across campus and where I can build some connections in, or even have a full report that really digs into what is going on locally and what you can build in. You can assess OER awareness. So, how aware are people of open educational resources? Use, how many people are using it and in what places? Or interest, how much interest is there in getting started or supporting this work? After you figure out where the easy places to go are, then you want to start identifying your peers. So this can be librarians, subject librarians, instruction librarians, digital humanities, and open access folks, anyone who has a potential interest in open ed, instructors, department chairs, and other people who are doing the work of education and might be interested in partnering in this work. Student government or other student advocates, it's often easier to talk to student government people though, because they're already going out and doing a lot of work across campus, whereas the students that aren't involved in this work might be more busy just getting through their classes. Instructional designers through the for Teaching and Learning and online and blended learning offices. And of course, accessibility, information technology, financial aid, and other offices, as well as your bookstore. And I did put really here because it's often concerning to people. My bookstore, really? I need to talk to them as a peer? Well, it depends. If you have an independent bookstore, it's owned by your university, they can often be really great partners. If your bookstore is owned by Follett or Barnes& Noble, maybe. It depends on the people working there. Get in touch with them anyway because it can still be useful to build connections so you can talk about data, you can talk about potential collaborations that might be useful down the line. And once you've identified those peers, you can build on those partnerships by offering training to them, saying, hey, let's talk about open education. But in order to talk about this, I need you to understand where I'm coming from. So let's attend a workshop, let's attend a webinar, let's go to this thing right here that we have today and learn a little bit more about it. Start an OER committee where you can meet monthly or bi monthly to talk about open education on your campus and how you can support it. Collaborate on specific projects like those workshops I mentioned earlier for Quality Matters here at Iowa State, or build in referral processes. It can be as simple as saying, now that you understand that I do this OER thing and what it is, if you get someone asking about something that could be an OER project, can you refer them to me? That's a very simple partnership, but it can be incredibly impactful once it's something that's standardized and built into your procedures. Okay, I'm not going to go into talking points yet, but I want to ask, where are you at right now in your local context? How many partnerships have you built up? Are you still just figuring out who to talk to on your campus? Or have you built up some more support already? Working on a committee, already built up support. Getting started on a committee can be very hard, but it's also very rewarding once it's off the ground. There is a committee and it is working hard. Good job. Anyone else? Oh, yep. You're a librarian at Central Washington working on a committee. Yeah. Building support across campus. We already have a stipend. We have a committee, but we all have so much else in it. Yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Newly learning how to integrate the library and bookstore with OER under one umbrella. So there's a lot of different places you all are coming from right now, from those who are very established to just getting started, and some of you still trying to figure out how to make things relevant. I absolutely get that. Okay, so let's say you want to get in touch more with people across campus. How do you build interest and talk to these different types of people? I highlighted this just a minute ago when I move forward, but tips for talking to instructors as you want to build some more relationships with them. The first note is start where it's easy, and that's very important because I think the hardest thing for people as you want to be a good advocate and talk across campus is you really want to get the people that are unsure about OER, the ones who say, that sounds bad. That sounds like it's not worth my time. But in reality, you do not want to start with those people. You want to start with the people that say, ooh, what is that? I'm really excited. What is this interesting thing that you're offering? Because starting where it's easy gets you immediate results with people who are either interested in learning more, interested in exploring your options, or just willing to talk to you about open education more broadly. Starting with the instructors who are already somewhat interested or at least questioning open education means that you have more options to build in support structures with them or to talk to them further down the line. You also want to build familiarity across campus, both familiarity from them to you and from you to them. So when people see you, they know, oh, this is the person I want to talk to about open education, and vice versa. So when you see someone that is an expert on campus, a champion, a trailblazer, you can say, that's the person that I want to make sure is going back to their department and telling them about open ed as well. If you do have any support available, you need to advertise that existing support to them because for a lot of instructors, it doesn't matter how much they care or want to do open ed work. If they don't have the time or interest, they're not going to pursue it. So if you have support available, even if it's just a consultations process, even if it's just you can meet with me and talk about your options, that's going to be something that gets someone else in the door to talk to you a little bit further. Finally, you can give clear examples for how faculty can get started because again, a lot of these people do not necessarily know what it means to use OER. And even though it's just as simple as it's instructional materials that you can use in your class, it is not necessarily different from any other instructional material. It can still be scary, especially when the copyright question comes up. What does this mean? How do I do this correctly? I don't want to get in trouble. That's okay. And finally, do not demonize publishers or faculty choice. A lot of our instructors have written their own textbooks or worked with people who have, and they're going to feel wrong if you come out and say publishers are bad people, they're doing these horrible things. Maybe the business models are bad. Maybe there are really bad examples of books that were horribly managed. But a lot of the instructors writing these books are doing it because they want to have the best materials for their students, and they didn't think there was any other way to do it. So don't demonize those people for their choices. If you're going out and talking to students, you want to develop a handout or a simple marketing campaign. It's a little bit different with students because you want to get across everything as easily as possible without going too far into the weeds, but you also want to give them something to do. Now, you can share information at orientation or new student events to help them understand here's different ways that we're supporting you on campus. But if you're talking to student government specifically, the people that are going to go out and try to do things about stuff on campus, you want to explain what you're doing and give them examples of ways they can help. Because the last thing you want is for student government to get fired up about open education and then decide that they know how to help when maybe you're already doing something about that. For example, you don't want people to tell departments, we want all of the courses using OER right now when you're trying to slowly build in support and interest on campus, because that's going to offer a lot of pushback in the long term. Oh, don't even want to talk about it. Okay, tips for talking to administrators then. Uh, Instructors are fun because you can talk to them as peers who are working on something. Students are fun because they can get really excited about just the idea of open education in general. But administrators are a little bit harder because usually when you're talking to them, you're coming forward with something you need. You're asking for something. So as you approach administrators about this work, it's good to bring examples of current or potential programs you could support. You can say, here is what we are doing, here's the support we have available, and here's what we could do if we had more support. If you have data, bring it, whether that's data about the number of colleges that have OER use in one class, the number of courses across your institution using open educational resources, or the number of student savings from the use of OER if you've worked that out yourself. You want to focus on a clear goal that is easy to pitch. So, hey, we want to get this Z degree program off the ground. We want to get 5 classes using OER this year. We want to do a 5% increase across the institution. Whatever the case might be, focus on a goal that makes sense to them and that you can push forward on. And finally, align your goals with existing institutional initiatives. Here at Iowa State, we just put out a new strategic plan where one of our main goals is to be the most student-centered institution, whatever that means. Well, we can make that mean the institution that listens to students, prioritizes affordability, and uses open educational resources. So if I'm trying to make that argument, I'm going to call back to that language in our strategic plan to make my case. But if you're just getting started, maybe you don't want to dig that deep. Maybe you just want to find support locally on your campus or regionally. You want to ask for advice and connect with more people doing this work. Learn from exemplars, people whose programs you really like and appreciate. And the most important thing really for anyone getting started in the first time is that your initiative does not need to have all the same pieces that someone else's does. You don't need to pay for a specific tool or membership to support OER. You do not need to have the same types of support services, the same number of staff. We cannot all have the same number of staff, sadly. But just remember, any difference you make, any steps you move forward is still noteworthy and important in its own way. And you can connect with us here at Iowa OER. The Iowa Open Education Action Team shares training materials, marketing materials, OER that have been adopted across our state, monthly blog posts, and more on our website. So before I move on, I want to ask you, what are your hanging questions at this point? I'm sure there's going to be some around Creative Commons licenses, so we can come back to that, but about OER in general, supporting it, and talking about it. Where are you guys at? And here's my shameless promotion of my 2 books. Again, I will share out the slides after this with all who registered, so you can check those out. You can also type your questions in the chat if you prefer not to unmute.
Abby, for people who are interested in some of the maybe less common elements of open education, like citizen science and maybe some of the more emerging things like open pedagogy,
Mm.
how would you suggest to librarians, who are supporting faculty in those areas, how would you maybe suggest to them to get started in those areas of support?
I think the biggest thing is looking up those very basic reviews and guides of those topics. Ironically, this is the part where I say, please look up other people's LibGuides because it is honestly one of the best ways to get an introduction if you're just getting started. And I do recommend it. If you want to say, I want to support people with open pedagogy, but I don't know how to get started, look at what other people's open pedagogy LibGuides look like. Look at how the modules other people have built look and how you might build on the same sorts of topics they talk about. Also, we have modules on our website for open pedagogy if you'd like to check them out as well. I see there's a question in the chat. One moment. From Terry, what are some ways to address comments that OER might be lesser quality materials than paid for materials? Great question. The you get what you pay for is one of the most annoying questions that we get, but I understand it. A lot of the time when I do my intro for faculty workshop, what I like to say is there are a variety of qualities for OER. You can get high quality materials, you can get low quality materials, you can get beautiful materials, you can get ugly materials. You can get things that are ugly and really high quality for learning. You can get things that are beautiful and actually kind of boring, you know? And the interesting thing about that is it's the exact same way for paid materials as well. If you're looking up textbooks from one specific topic across 5 different publishers. You're going to see some that are pretty but kind of boring and bland. You're going to see some that are ugly but actually pretty good learning materials. And really, this is not an OER problem. This is just a variety of quality problem. The nice thing about OER is if you like the content but you think it's ugly, you can always change that down the line. Or if you think something is mostly good but not quite there, adaptation is always an option. You don't have to say to your students, please buy 3 books so we can cover all these topics. You can make an adaptation that helps meet their needs. So there are ways around that question. And also, there's always new things coming out. So while there might not be the best thing right now, new things may come out later that help bridge that gap. The unspoken answer would also be someone is paying for those materials because the actual time spent on developing, publishing, and supporting the creation of OER is not all unpaid labor, not all the time. A lot of it comes down to the library staff supporting it, the publishers, whether that's a university press or library publisher, the staff that are doing copy editing on it, the graduate students that are doing extra support in their own time. There's actually a lot of time and work that goes into these materials that might not be acknowledged as such.
Looks like we have a question from Amelia.
Hmm.
How much should we be concerned with predatory publishers who claim to offer open and peer review but do not?
I think that's more of a problem in the traditional journal publishing sphere than it is for books, but it can happen there as well. The weird thing about predatory publishers is they thrive in areas where people are clamoring for impact. They thrive in areas where I want to reach the most people possible by getting extra authors on this, by having a high journal impact factor, by getting all these different pieces to my tenure and promotion review, for example. In contrast, a lot of the open education publishing we see coming in are less concerned with those specific topics and more about just making sure stuff gets out. A lot of the time when someone is doing open education publishing or open textbook publishing, what they're doing is not trying to find a publisher that's going to take their work. It's working on a project that then they have to find other ways to support, whether that's working with a local institutional publisher, working with a regional group that helps support this publishing. They're less likely to fall into those traps.
One kind of predatory practice we do sort of see in the open sphere, though, well, I sort of consider it predatory, is sort of the open washing or open wrapping of like educational technology companies taking open content that's already been created and sort of pulling it into their reader or their own sort of proprietary system and then charging students for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of a predatory practice that we do see.
Thank you, Mariah. Yes. I was trying to find the snapping fingers emoji to applaud you properly.
Do we want to go back, Abby, to the question that somebody had about Creative Commons
Yes. How do you
citation?
actually apply a CC license to your work is the one I had to skip earlier, uh, which is a great question. How do you actually apply a CC license to your work? Is there a formalized process, or is it simple as pasting the correct CC license on the material? So there is technically a formalized process, but it's not like signing up your work with the US Copyright Service. It's not that complicated. In fact, I would say it's between the two. You do just paste the correct license on the material, but you should have it stated outright. For example, this material by me is available under this license and link to the license. That way, people can easily find that statement, and then any reuse of your work afterwards will still have that statement written down onto it, so people can find that original version as well. There are in the CC license, the Creative Commons website, a license creator where you can also get a short HTML piece that you can paste onto a website or a piece of content that has all of that content you need on it. So, what is the title of the work? Who are you? What is the license? And what is that link? The license chooser is also very good right now. The beta is helps you walk through the process of which of these pieces of the license do I want and how do I get it ready for my work. Okay, other questions? Okay, hearing nothing. Here's last call for questions then, or otherwise we'll leave a couple minutes early.
Well, thank you so much for coming, everyone. And thanks to Abby for an excellent presentation. You packed so much information into this session. I just feel like
Maybe a little
there's so
too
much
much.
to
I probably
learn.
could have
No,
spent
I
more
don't
time
think
on
so.
one thing.
I don't think so. I think this has really given me some great ideas too for things to share with other librarians. And I think, thanks for coming everyone today. And Abby will send the slides out after the presentation. And you can feel free to contact Abby or Iowa OER Action Team through the links in the chat. And we will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.